Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. Got some people joining right now, so just give a few minutes as people come into the webinar. We'll get started shortly. Welcome, everybody. We're just waiting a few minutes while the room is still filling up pretty quickly here, so waiting for everyone to get into the webinar room so we can get started. All right. Looks like we've started to slow down a little bit with people coming in. I'm sure we'll get a few more to join, but we will officially get started. Welcome to From Anxiety to Achievement, and welcome to our expert speakers tonight. We've got Dr. Carrie Poline, who is our guest expert, and Dr. Jed Applerouth. Jed, if you don't mind advancing the slides, I can share a little bit about our two great speakers who I have the privilege of knowing personally, in addition to what their professional skills are. And I can say, in addition to all the wonderful professional skills that they both bring to the table, they're both just really great, compassionate people who love working with kids. And so I'm really excited to hear what they have to say tonight. But a little bit about each of them. Jed is a nationally certified counselor and a PhD in educational psychology. He's the founder and president of Applerouth Education, and where I work. And he is a teacher and educational innovator. And he really serves as the conduit between all of the expert research and everything that we do here at Applerouth educationally around motivation, academic anxiety, and many of the things that we'll be speaking about here tonight. Dr. Carrie Poline, our guest expert, is a double board certified practitioner in child and adolescent and adult psychiatry. She specializes in eating disorders, anxiety, mood, and child behavioral disorders. So they both obviously bring a lot to the table. They're both also parents in addition to everything else. So very excited to dive into what you guys have to say tonight. Jed, if you'll just share the next few slides, just a little bit about Applerouth before we dive into the content. But really at Applerouth, you may have heard of us before. This may be your first event with us, but if there's one sort of central thing about, why I work at Applerouth, why Jed started this company and has been doing this now for over 20 years, is that we've discovered the power of the ability to change student self-beliefs by working with them in an educational setting and having them have the ability to see what they can accomplish. And that really can change the trajectory of their lives. And that's what excites us about our work. We do that in three different ways. We provide academic tutoring, K through 12 and college. We do test prep, everything from the SAT and ACT to private school admissions tests like the SSAT and ISE. And we also do executive function coaching, helping kids just with their general organizational skills and managing all the day-to-day things that go with being successful in school, which, as we all know well, are more difficult sometimes than meets the eye. So that's about us, but enough about us. Let's get to the topic of the day. So I'm going to just kind of dive in with defining some of the basics. We talk a lot about anxiety, and we've been all hearing a lot in the news and experiencing in our lives how kids are experiencing more and more anxiety. But I think, and perhaps Carrie, if you could kick this off, just talking a little bit about what is anxiety really? And then more specifically, how is it showing up in the kids that you're seeing in your day-to-day work as a psychiatrist?
Great. Thank you, Diana. So Jed and I talk about this sometimes. I hate the word anxiety and depression because it's so overused and it doesn't really tell us anything anymore. Because we know that anxiety is actually really adaptive. The idea of anxiety, and it enables you to respond in the presence of danger. It evokes fear. It's fight or flight response. So it's really important to have some anxiety. So anxiety on its own is adaptive. It's not something that we worry too much about when you're responding appropriately. When you have a test, you study for it, get a little anxious before, it helps you study a little bit more. Take the test, you feel good about it, you move on, right? Or, there's some kind of a traffic jam and you have to be on time. So you focus a little bit more. Maybe you're able to, veer away from the traffic and go on a different route. It evokes the ability to adapt. And so anxiety on its own is actually a pretty positive and necessary tool. when it becomes maladaptive, right? When it gets in the way, keeps us stuck, frozen, is when we would consider the spectrum of disordered, right? So not everybody who has anxiety meets criteria for an anxiety disorder. And I just really want to kind of, it's a state of anxiety is really adaptive, but we're able to move through it. When it keeps us stuck, that's when we really want to evaluate what's going on. And so I don't know how much you want me to dive in, Diana, into like the nitty gritty of anxiety, but it shows up in like, I would say 3 or 4 really noticeable ways. One is the generalized worries. So worry, can't make decisions, ruminating, gets caught in their own head. So difficulty with sleeping, difficulty with like muscle tension, focus, because they're constantly rethinking and worrying. So that's really common. Panic attacks and panic disorder is sort of this like sympathetic overdrive where perhaps there's a trigger, a known trigger or an unknown trigger that evokes like really an attack. And it usually looks like, a fight or flight response. So you're shortness of breath, you're sweating, you feel like you're going to die. It's really overwhelming. And then panic disorder is like that fear of having another panic attack, which leads to avoidance. And then we have like the whole phobia fear realm, which I see most commonly as school and social phobia, which again leads to lots and lots of avoidance. So I talk about avoidance a lot with anxiety because it's often anxiety's best friend. So that's how we escape the fight or flight. That's how we cope. And we know that's really maladaptive. There are other associated anxiety disorders, but I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty for tonight.
Yeah. And I think your point, which is one that, as lay people probably don't think about enough because there's so, anxiety, you hear the word anxiety and it's associated as an automatic negative, and making the important point that our goal in life is not to never have any anxiety.
That's right.
And that's, I think, something important to remember. I'm curious, Jed, just to, as I mentioned earlier, you obviously do the research piece behind what we do, but you also work with students one-on-one as an executive function coach. And so what are you seeing kind of show up in students? Like if you have any anxious students, like how is that showing up? How is it affecting them in school? Just kind of what are you seeing on the ground?
Students I work with, almost to a person, they all have some anxiety. And again, as Carrie mentioned, there's the adaptive normal stressors. I'm nervous about this. I'm worried about this. Then there's the overwhelm. And thankfully, my students, none of them are being treated for clinical anxiety, for disorders, but definitely it shows up. My kids get overwhelmed. My kids get stressed. And many of them, I've seen them actually, there's just too much on them. Their plates, they're the cup runneth over. And I've seen several of my students in the past year downshift. And one of my students this year at the University of Michigan, like her thing was, there's so much, I'm doing this pre-med, all this classes, and it's too much. And she knocked down a class, got rid of bio and the lab. Suddenly, my life is better. Suddenly I can be social. And I'm seeing the intersection a lot between academic overwhelm and social challenges and feelings of disconnection, feelings of like, I feel less fulfilled socially. And so even if the academics are up and I'm hitting a certain threshold academically, GPA wise, I'm feeling isolated. I'm feeling distant from my friends, or less than, or disconnected, whether I have students who are in 9th grade or my students who are in college. I see that tension between academic achievement and performance and social isolation, disconnection, and some of the anxiety that I'm not connecting, because it's a profound human need to connect, to have friends, to have relationships. Those things keep us sane. And when Carrie and I both saw that during the pandemic, when those were disconnected, kids became less sane. When you lose your network and your connections and your humans ground us. And when you lose that, like seeing your friends on a screen doesn't do it, doesn't cut it. We need those mammalian, the interface to see people and smell people and see, body language, the whole thing. And so when I have students who are like, I'm getting the grades I need, and I've actually had a recent conversation about a student who was taking one of the stimulants, academic, it was keeping his grades up, but he was feeling like I'm being affected by this socially in a very negative way. And I've seen this over 20 years, students who are on stimulants, some of them very, very helpful, but some people feel like it's affecting me socially and I'm not myself and I'm more awkward. I'm not as natural, as loose. And you know what? If I turn down the stimulant, maybe my grades dip a little bit, but then suddenly I have friends and I'm looser and I'm laughing and I'm talking a little more in class, a little more distracted. So if my GPA suffers a tiny bit, but I'm socially fulfilled, well, that to me is a good trade-off. And so I see, again, these tensions, and that as part of the, achievement, anxiety, that's where I see some of that going together in my work.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Jed. I'm curious too. So like, as you're seeing all this, maybe Jed, we'll start with you on this one and then hear what Carrie has to say. But so you're seeing this dynamic unfold, talking about how we can help, right? Like what are strategies if you see a kid who's kind of in this negative spiral of being too overwhelmed with the academics and not connecting, what are some of the strategies that you'd recommend? I think first, let's talk about strategies that students can do and parents can use with their students, but I don't, later in the conversation also want to get into things parents can do and maybe not do as well. Let's start with the students.
And so much of it has to do with, the student and what they're nervous about. So again, I mentioned a few of my students are nervous about they're feeling isolated, disconnected. They're not plugged into the network of humans. And that's creating some anxiety because of isolation. It gets anxiety. That's just how that works. You lock anyone and you isolate them, it's like torture. So we need people to help us. So that's one form of anxiety. But the counterpoint to that is there are people who are so caught up in the cycle of performance and the cycle of achievement and the fear of falling behind. So they're less socially oriented, but if I fall behind my competitive set, my cohort, whether it's in high school going to college or in college applying to med school, or at any point, you can get caught up in the cycle of my grades, my performance isn't good enough. And suddenly that can create tremendous anxiety. And that can become very maladaptive as well. People who become myopically focused on this one little piece because they're worried they're not going to be enough. They're going to be inadequate. They're not going to have what they need to do well in the future. And that really is, that's anxiety. So I think part of it that you diagnose is what is the source of your worry in the future? Is it going to be, I'm going to be alone? I'm going to be, or is it, I'm going to fail? I'm going to be less than, I'm going to be disappointed in myself. And, and then part of it is addressing it from that place. Because in some cases, no matter where you are on that spectrum, there's going to be a psychological reframe. You're going to have to work with them and figure out how this thought of, this future self, this future condition that's going to, be so, it's going to make you distraught. Like, what is that future self that you're so worried about? You feel like you're not going to have the resources to thrive or do well. You're going to be inadequate in some capacity, and talking about that. In some cases, it's looking at this very narrow goal they've set for themselves. And I might start, talking about that. What, in terms of why do you need this outcome? Is there no other reasonable, decent outcome? If you don't achieve this one thing, does your world really fall apart? And that's a pretty big counseling move of looking at, the masturbation that it has to be this way, or it's going to be a disaster, the awfulizing, catastrophizing. And I really question that. And parents can do that. Parents can talk to their kids about what they're nervous or anxious about. And on the other side, if they're really, this disconnection socially, well, we can talk about that and making room and making space and really encouraging the connections and facilitating connections and making sure your students are prioritizing those connections and making, that's something parents can do, is kind of clear out some space, make sure the kids aren't overscheduled and they actually have time for their friends and things like that. So those are basic things, as basic conversations you can do with kids, is making sure there's space. That's a big thing that Carrie and I both have talked about, balance, making sure there's balance. And if a parent senses that things are really out of alignment, things are out of balance, as the adult, you can come in and talk to your kids about that and looking at what's there. Do we need all these things on the plate? And over several decades, every single time I've seen a kid take things off the plate, it's almost inevitably gotten better. because the problem in our age is there's too much, and kids are trying to do too much. And then childhood isn't as spacious as it was several decades ago. And so typically you get a little bit more health. And even when the pandemic hit, Carrie and I talked about this too. I mean, in the very beginning, it's like some kids could take a breath. And then, there was problems down the road of isolation. But in the beginning, having just a decompression, some stress release was for a lot of kids very healthy. Suddenly, I don't have to keep running like at full speed for a minute and catch my breath. And then suddenly, oh, okay, now I can focus on what really matters to me. Carrie, yeah, your turn.
So, sort of understanding, Jed and I talk about like understanding where your child or adolescent or even young adult is in their brain development, like where are they? What are their natural protective factors? Like what are their strengths, and leveraging their strengths, and building self-esteem, because the backside of that is perfectionism, right? Where we dump all of our, we just kind of, everything is about the grade, the achievement. And in my world, in the eating disorder world, it's all about appearance, thinness. But they're very similar in terms of that black and white thinking. And, I think breaking down perfectionism is really looking at, how else can we parent children outside of just the, good job on the A. What can we do differently to reinforce good job balancing out your sleep today? Like, great job going to bed on time when you were tired. Like, nicely done prioritizing your social life today. Instead of just giving them the praise that they're already getting on social media, that they're already getting from teachers in school, that they're already getting from their peers. Because we live in that world where we're constantly comparing ourselves, and it's absolutely reinforcing. So what I see most frequently in this realm is just the perfectionism, like the unable to step outside of that black and white thinking. Sometimes we do need to step in.
Yeah. One thing I want to throw in there, it just kind of triggered my head in terms of the perfectionism piece, which I've seen with students before. One of the things I do teach, and I think parents can model, it's kindness to self. And that, the nurturing of self. And that's part of that tension of I'm not going to be good enough for XYZ, or it has to be this way, is I try to encourage students to think about what they need to take care of themselves. And I really push self-care, and that's level of self-awareness. So what do you need? And what's missing? And I talk about the life wheel and we actually have had kids do the life wheel, and academics or physical activity or friendship, and like where are you really strong, and what's missing in your life, and what do you need to feel more fulfilled? And that takes away some of this perfectionistic, I'm myopically focused on one thing or one part of my whole wheel, versus thinking about yourself holistically and being just more gentle with yourself and more kind to yourself and more loving. And I talk about that with my high school kids and college kids, like, what do you need and what's missing in your life? And what do you, to really feel like this part of your life is working and you're happy. Parents can model that for their kids in terms of, again, self-care, versus myopically focusing on this one academics or this grade or GPA or your college essays, versus demonstrating and modeling self-care for your kids. And if your kids see you taking care of yourself and being good to yourself and doing things that are healthy and beneficial to kids, like, okay, so taking care of yourself is kind of part of the larger, this adult thing of success. Being a good adult means, what do I need to be healthy and whole in myself? And if kids see that, versus if they see the parent being really focused on something external, or really, if they see their parents doing the whole life wheel themselves, and they're going to yoga, or they're doing their tai chi, they're doing their meditation, they're doing things, they're seeing their friends, they're going in to a women's meeting or a men's group, or things like, oh, okay, the kids, that's what an adult looks like. And versus not just my job is this one little thing. No, your job is to, the full experience of being a human being and enjoying 10th grade and, feeling, this is a good part of your life. Because I tell my students, like high school, you get it's a one time and then it's gone. And if you just grind through these 3-4 years and you get this number, but you've lost so much, which you don't get back, I'm like, that, what kind of victory is that? Maybe you get into this college, but gosh, like at what cost? And I talk about that. So I try to shift that conversation towards this holistic, that takes away some of the pressure. And they look at this like, oh yeah, this is, you get to do 9th grade one time and then it's gone. Or you get freshman year of college once. And if you're grinding out doing 6 classes and 4 labs, and then, oh, that was freshman year, that one's gone. And then, no, like these are important years and these are important experiences. And I don't want them to miss on other, not just be so focused on GPA. So that to me is part of my conversation when I'm working, and I'm sure Carrie also, whether, looking at their weight or this thing, like, no, there's so much more than this number that you're honed in on.
Yeah. And to that point, I think understanding the guardrails, what are the things that are the non-negotiables in your family life, and in your child's life. In my home, it's bedtime, screen time, and we try to prioritize family meals. And there's a lot of research, a lot of data prioritizing just a family meal as many times as possible, even if it's only once a week because of sports and after school, if it's 3 times a week, even better. A time where everyone puts down their electronics, sits at the table, looks at each other in the eye, enjoys a meal. It's really protective against most psychopathology, including anxiety and depression, but most of all, substance abuse and promiscuity. Lots and lots and lots of good data around that. So there are very small things that we can do that are really protective.
I feel like what I hear you both saying to a certain extent is that the work we want our kids to do on themselves, we as parents have to be doing as well, in terms of making sure we're taking care of ourselves and having a balanced perspective and modeling a good sort of healthy lifestyle. And yeah, we have work, but we also have to make time for family and all those kinds of things. I'm curious if there's anything, in addition to some of the proactive things that you mentioned, like family dinners and these kinds of conversations to have with kids, things that maybe you're seeing that parents are doing probably well-intentioned, but that might actually be contributing to the problem that parents may not be aware of.
One thing I'm aware of is I just had a conversation 2 days ago with a mom. But when there is a setback or there is a failure or there is something perceived as a failure, and the kid, I noticed this, and looking what Carrie mentioned before, it's like, what are the conversations you're having with your kids? And is it, do you only, is it only the grades? And is it, and how the parent responds to my kid didn't do well in the physics, and I noticed he was put it off to the end, and where your conversations are just about the academic and the performance, and the parental response to setbacks and failure really it can contribute in a massive way to anxiety for students. If they perceive that I can't, if I don't do well, I'm going to, I'll get my own shame spiral about myself. And but then my parents come in on me and I realize, oh, wow, I really am performing. And that really is what they're attending to. And that, and part of it is obviously for kids getting Fs in their classes, you can't gloss it over and everything is lovely. But when the parental response, what I, as a coach, I come in with curiosity and talk versus like this. I make sure there's no shame at all. And I meet a kid where a kid is. And so if parents come and kids can feel it, if there's, the shame or there's, like I expect you to be here and you're coming in here and you're way below what I, even if part of it, the parent may have been a much better student and this kid is not the parent. And part of it is level setting your own expectations for the kid that you have versus the student that you were, and not trying to project what, your aspirations, your goals onto your kid. And in multiple kids, the more kids you have, you're going to have enough genetic diversity and variety where you see there's a whole range. My brother has 6 kids, and it's like, wow, even if we throw our genes together and this is super studious kid, This kid is gonna be less ambitious. This kid will get the A. It's like this whole range. And it's nice knowing that your kids are going to be who they are going to be. And so your pressure is be careful when your kids come back with a lower grade, or that you don't, I don't know, just be, again, I try to come and talk about it and how did it go and how did you prepare for this, and more questions versus coming in like I'm disappointed. And I try to never bring that energy. And my goal is to help students, but also I want to figure out what their goals are. And I try to figure out what their definition of success is versus me as what do I want you to be versus what are you going for yourself, and what does success look like for you? And that to me is a really important question. And even like for college, because again, which is in other things, but for grades and what GPA do you want? Because the parents tell me this, but like David, what do you want? What's a good year look like for you this year as a ninth grader? And getting a sense as parents and realizing it can be very different from your daughter to your son to your older to middle kid. There are different measures. So just be very mindful you aren't projecting too much onto your kids.
So to add on to that, Diana, you mentioned well-intentioned parents. I think everybody who's here is well-intentioned, and
Yeah.
we're all human. But there are some pitfalls I have seen over the years that is, again, highly reinforced in our society. So the over helicoptering, which I would say, what is it now? Like a snowplow parenting, not allowing for mistakes, right? Like you're basically just carving the way, doing the homework for them, talking to the teacher for them, preparing the email, calling not allowing for mistakes, because the only way they will learn and gain mastery and feel good about the next step is if they've been allowed to fail. And failure is just the best opportunity for learning. And so I celebrate failures. I think the key is, when we're thinking about the pathological end of it, is if we're repeating patterns and we're not learning from failures, then perhaps we need to look deeper and understand, is there an issue? And again, it could be a learning disability. It could be a primary attention, an ADHD that we're missing, versus some kind of anxiety disorder. So looking for patterns and pitfalls rather than, just the opportunity for mistakes.
Carrie, your point about, maybe there's some other things going on with certain students. I mean, what kinds of things, a lot of what we're talking about, I think, are things that are within the range of things that kids are going to experience that parents can handle at home. But what are the types of things that parents should be looking for that might say, hey, like, we need extra help. Maybe we need an evaluation. Maybe we need a therapist. Like, what are the, are there signs that parents should be looking for that can be helpful to say, like, okay, we need something beyond just what we can do at home?
Yeah. So I think, again, really understanding your child and where they are, and understanding if there's a change in distress level and functioning, and how much of a change. So somebody that was pretty much able to problem solve and get through the day and is now coming home day after day and unable to focus, unable to really, do the daily activities they need to do, all across homework, hygiene, social, that level of functioning is really what we first look at. Certainly, distress level, and if distress level is interfering with their ability to engage. And then, I'm going to throw in there, obviously, severe anxiety can lead to depression and safety concerns. So if there's anything on your radar around self-harm, drugs, alcohol, suicidality, that is an absolute for seeking more help.
Thanks, Carrie. We have actually quite a lot already coming in on the audience Q&A. So I think it's good to maybe shift in that direction so we make sure we get a chance to answer a bunch of what's coming in. And I suspect we'll get more once we get going with that. Jed, if you don't mind sharing the slides again, you're going to see appear on your screen for a few minutes here, a poll. If you don't mind taking it, just gives us a better sense of how to follow up with you, should you have questions in the future, and how you can follow up with us. So when you see that poll on the screen, if you could just take a moment to complete that. And then Jed, if you can advance, I think not to this slide, but to the next one after that. Just to, this is again, reminder of the services that we have. We have a link that we can share also if you want to schedule time to talk to a program advisor about the services that we offer. Jed, on the next slide is one that may be of particular interest to this audience, which is just our diagnostic for executive function coaching. We do a mind print assessment, which is sort of an analysis of not how you're performing in school, but why the performance might be that way. Things like how's the working memory, attention, things like that, followed by a 30-minute one-on-one coaching consultation. So those are, some of the things, some of the ways to continue to engage with Applerouth. We also have many more events coming up on our events calendar. And once everyone's finished completing that poll, start diving into, let's take a look at what's in the Q&A here. All right, so one parent is asking, my daughter is often anxious around final exam time. Are there any tips for dealing with that specific kind of stress? I think, Jed, that might be a good one for you. I know you've seen that many times.
Yeah. And the good part of it, when students, are coming towards the finals, or I see it a lot for AP exams, any kind of a high stakes endeavor where performance matters. And so one of the most important things is, getting a sense, their general level of understanding and mastery of the material is a big part of it. And, in terms of looking at what, for me, I always do an inquiry of, how have you done in the past on exams? And there are some kids who really get amped up and they have a lot of anxiety, but they always do well. And so in that case, as Carrie mentioned, it's adaptive anxiety, and it leads you to study and focus and attend, and you're nervous, but then you do okay. And sometimes it's the converse, people who don't have much anxiety and they have a sense of overconfidence that's unearned, and then they go in there and then they do very poorly on their exam. So typically it's like I go in there with an 85, after my finals I'm in the low 70s, or I'm failing. Where people, and so part of it, I want to get a sense of how they've done historically. Can you calibrate? Can you help me understand? If there is anxiety around finals, have they really been challenged in the past? Then we talk about those. We inquire, the structure, the form, like the context of that. And part of it is, if you do have some anxiety, is it because of the tests or the midterms? Where's your current grade? Where do you want the grade to be at the end, post finals? What is your actual goal? And then looking at how they're studying, looking at how much they're studying, looking at, are they going to extra support groups and talking to the teacher, like just getting a sense of what their plan is. Because everyone, when you have a plan and you're working the plan, you become less anxious. It seems to be like anxiety runs amok when the amygdala is just circling through negative possible future outcomes. When you begin to activate the frontal cortex, you begin to activate the problem-solving centers. That inhibits like its sense of GABA back, and the amygdala becomes less reactive. So when you are working, when you are planning and working and solving, that calms the amygdala down. So one of the most important things is stop thinking or worrying about the future and start doing something. Start to engage, and that can be very helpful. The excessive rumination about these future negative, that's honestly, it's not that helpful. One thing I do encourage kids to do is take 10 minutes if they're really anxious or nervous. If they don't have a Dr. Carrie Poline to talk to, is 10 minutes of writing. And there's research on this, that simple writing about your anxious feelings. What are you afraid of? How is it showing up for you? There's something that even just getting a hold of that, like seeing the pattern, when there is I'm in this cycle of thought and what I'm thinking about, that's more compulsive or that's more repetitive. And you can still have some repetitive thoughts and do okay. But if it really becomes, I want to get a sense of what my mind is doing. And so I can begin to observe my mind in action. That is one of the first parts of getting a hold of yourself, is understanding, how you're working through this. How is this showing up physically from me? I can't sleep at night, XYZ. And if it comes to a certain level, then getting help can be very powerful and very helpful. But one of the most basic things is seeing the pattern yourself that you're in. And then, do you have a plan? Are you getting the help that you need? Do you have enough support? And for kids who have anxiety, for example, like starting earlier in the process, not waiting, because when you wait later, that anxiety ramps up. And so if there's starting 2 weeks before and doing some prep, planning things out, that can be very helpful, very powerful, versus waiting and just stewing in your fears and so forth.
Thanks, Jed. We have another parent who's indicating that, I guess in the whole fight, flight, or freeze response to anxiety, their child tends to freeze. And, without knowing more detail what that looks like, though, it sounds like they're like, what are some specific strategies to address that? Their kid is freezing up with anxiety, and what can they do?
Yeah, I think, again, freezing is very common response. We don't all panic. Sometimes we just get stuck. And so I think the key for parents is to be in it with their kids, which is often hard because first we have to calm our own anxiety down about your child being off task or not accomplishing whatever was needed to be accomplishing tonight. So being in it with your child, regulating your own breathing, being available to just simply, some kids just simply need you to sit next to them and breathe with them, remind them where they are, use their sensory inputs. I know some patients do really well with ice or cool, like music, some kind of sensory input to get them back in their body. Using those mindfulness skills, to really empathize, validate, and kind of be in it before we can start looking at the overwhelm and breaking it down. So a lot of the freeze is also like, I don't know where to start. And parents can be really helpful at saying, okay, I see like you have 4 things on your agenda. We're actually just going to start with this right now. And as Jed said, just do it. Like, we're just going to put pen to paper, even if it's not doing it well, and helping them get to that pen to paper place. It's really hard for parents to be in it. And I think that's what I see both as a professional and a parent. We have our own agenda, we're busy. It's really hard to self-regulate on our own. Just kind of like admitting that.
Another question here actually relates to tutoring. The parent is saying that their child needs tutoring, but actually gets anxious about the idea of going to tutoring sessions because they're already having, a lot of difficulty in school. So that's probably, I guess, a sensitive area for them. So any suggestions, I guess, as a parent to make the child feel more comfortable and also motivated? It sounds like the child is also afraid that if they learn more, then they'll get bumped up to harder classes in school. So it looks like the question is addressing both, like, how can they be comfortable addressing their perhaps weaknesses or academic challenges with another person, and then also feeling motivated to grow as a student.
I mean, to me, getting help seeking is a very adaptive thing. And I think as adults to model that, when we need our help, we go get help. We get extra support. And part of it is looking at, the resources you have at your disposal. Are you using them? And going to after school support, finding a tutor, doing something like it. To me, it's a major positive. And it's very versus just white knuckle, just go do it yourself. And so the idea of getting tutor when you need it, I think parents can model what do parents do when they need help? Sometimes parents might go and have a personal trainer if they're trying to get fit, or they may call someone who's expert in a certain area. They have a CPA, or they have an attorney. They have someone who goes to see a doctor, people who can help them with certain things. And so I think part of it's a conversation, this level of humility that you don't have to have it all figured out yourself. And there are times, and what I don't want is kids to have a crutch where they need a person forever and they're not getting better or growing or evolving. But in a certain time, like if I'm just totally flummoxed by calculus, and I don't want to have a failure event if and so part of it is realizing I'm really stuck in this area. Let me get some extra help here. And then you titrate it down and you kind of phase it out. But in the moment, I need some support here. And then you're building capacity and realizing this is a nice thing. You identify the need, and then you seek the help, get the help, and then you become less reliant upon it. That to me is the model. And so that's a level of humility that we all need help at some point. There's no shame in getting help. And to me, it's actually like the people I know who are most successful in life are the ones who get help when they need it. And that to me is framing that as a strength, not as a weakness. So kind of a reframe there around that sense of getting help is a bad thing. When it comes to if I do well, then I'll get bumped to higher classes. Well, that's a valid concern. And I always want to validate kids. And so, I get that. I hear that. And part of it is looking at, doing better in this class doesn't necessarily mean we're going to pop you into all honors and AP classes. And part of it is we're going to make those decisions on a case-by-case basis based on past performance, based on, the caseload. It's not just going to be because you can do an honors or AP, you should, especially, and looking at the student, looking at the context, and maybe, of course, you could handle 4 APs, but for this student, based on past experience, I think 1 or 2 is probably more appropriate. And based on what our aspirations are, what the goals are. So I'm not going to throw you to the, into the ocean just because you've got a 92 in this class now, you're instantly going into AP class. We're going to really evaluate it and be smart and what's developmentally appropriate for you, what's socially appropriate for you, what's psychologically appropriate for you versus just what could you handle. And that's what I saw with my student in Michigan. It's like, I could do 5 classes and 2 labs, but that's going to be miserable. And just, because you can't, that's not going to be the best use of my energy, my time, and the best use of my year. And so I'm not going to go full speed just because I can. And so I think telling kids we're not going to, we're going to be respectful and we're going to include you in the conversation. Just because, the teacher says that you're recommended for the advanced track doesn't mean we automatically, by default, push you into every advanced track that you potentially could do. That to me is irresponsible. You have to really look at the kid, talk to the student, get their input, and have them be part of this conversation. So when they're in college, they're going to have that much more agency because we're always trying to build competent adults. That to me, whether the kids are in 8th grade or in 10th grade, and it's not that long until they're doing it themselves. 800 miles from where your house is. So getting them involved in those conversations early is a way to build capacity and build sense of self and agency, which we all want our kids to have.
And I think to your point, Jed, earlier, that most good tutors are not going to create a shame spiral if you make a mistake. So I would think that somebody would have performance anxiety, their tutor would be able to celebrate their mistakes and build from it. And, a lot of performance anxiety can lead to trying to put off wanting to see a tutor because they have to perform more in the tutoring. And that's really hard. So it's just reframing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Carrie, there's some questions in here about medications that I wanted to direct to you. One of the attendees is asking about some of the stimulants that kind of got mentioned in passing in our conversation earlier, ones that might have the side effect of making kids hyper-focused on their academics in a way that might be unhealthy or might affect their personality in a way that takes away from their social life. And so this parent is just kind of asking, I think has concerns about that and is asking what are examples of those. I don't know if there are specific examples or just any elaboration that you can provide.
Yeah, so the truth is it's not just stimulants. It would be any medication that's, part of the goal in psychiatry is to find a sweet spot where we're treating the symptoms and not causing side effects. And it is a very painful process of trial and error. And so I would say, for example, with ADHD, you would want to treat the core symptoms of ADHD, the inattention, the hyperactivity, the impulsivity in a way that would enable the child or adolescent to be high functioning and, perhaps be able to attend to the material in class and finish their homework, where we wouldn't be able to do off medicine. However, if we're hyper focusing or unable or feel muted or having some mood symptoms where they can't emote, I would say then they're probably too heavily medicated, meaning they're not at that happy sweet spot with their dosing, or they're not able to tolerate that medicine. So it is kind of that painstaking, let's look at the dosage, let's look at how long acting the medicine is, how they're metabolizing it. And it takes a little bit of finesse and time. Usually with most kids, we can get to that place over time. And yeah, if there are any more specific questions, I'm happy to answer. I don't want to get in the weeds on that.
Yeah, there was something also about recommendations for supplements that support anxiety. I don't know if there's any evidence behind that or not, but curious what your thoughts are there.
In general, supplementation is, I kind of look at it as what would be helpful for all of us, not just for anxious kids, right? So a healthy, varied diet, a multivitamin, omega-3 fatty acids. These are things that, help with mood, memory, and I would recommend it for everyone. There's not really a whole lot of good data on things like CBD. It's out there, it's everywhere. It hasn't been well studied. So it's not to say that there aren't supplements that are helpful. It's just mainly to say that we can't really recommend X supplement for X disorder.
In lieu of ginkgo biloba or St. John's wort, of those, I mean, one of the things I love is exercise, cardiovascular exercise, and sleep, to help mitigate anxiety and help reduce that, which are the lifestyle, without worrying about the molecules and chemicals, as your body makes its own molecules and your own chemicals and serotonin and endorphin, all the good stuff that helps tamp down anxiety and lower cortisol level. Like exercise is so important and sleep is so important. And whenever those are, it's an interesting thing, the whole dysregulation of sleep and anxiety and which is feeding which, and they're kind of, there's a feedback loop there. But if you can encourage the behaviors to help your kids get more sleep, that I've seen that help anxiety. And also I've seen, like during the pandemic, especially when exercise was going away, anxiety levels were going up, as well as other problems. When an exercise came back in a meaningful way, that helped the mental health of a lot of students I worked with and to talk with other tutors about. So I do know that those two things they're not, molecules or supplements, but they release molecules which help the overall balance, and making sure your kid's getting enough physical activity, because oftentimes those things are being cut from, certain school programs. But when, kids get real cardiovascular fitness in, their heart really pumps, it helps manage a lot. And so I would say that to me is a major supplement. Vitamin E for exercise and S for sleep. Those are two major vitamins your kids need to be getting.
Yes.
Right. And probably something that none of us, including kids, get enough of, right? Either of those two things.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be the last question, unless we get another one in the next minute here. But I think this is one that you guys have kind of already addressed to a certain extent, but it's almost like a little case study in some of the things you guys were discussing earlier. It's parents saying, look, their daughter's academics are suffering right now because they have a long school day, they commute to school, they're a competitive swimmer. But now the child's kind of stuck. They feel bad about dropping an activity. They don't want to drop the swim. And the parent really sounds like wants to support some healthy decision-making, like would be happy for the child to maybe drop an activity or to maybe try something like getting some help with study habits or help from teachers, and just trying to, I think, help the child navigate the decision. And what advice would you give them to help them do that and feel good about that decision?
Carrie, you go first.
I think we kind of covered this, but sometimes when we're locked in that difficulty making decisions, we do need a parent to step in, or a trusted teacher or coach to recognize some of the warning signs. It's funny, sometimes people will come to me for, a medication change, and I'll say, drop physics on a prescription pad.
Love that.
And they come back and they're like, oh my God, that worked. I'm like, yeah, we don't need to go up on your Zoloft. We just need to look at what's on your plate. So I think Jed mentioned that before, but hearing it from their doctor solidified it. So they may really need to hear it from their coach. And you might need to have to partner with their coach and to say, we need to, your coach is even noticing, like, we need to drop swim right now because it's too much. Or, it's not, if there's a sense of relief that often comes with dropping something, it's that anxiety about making the decision that's really keeping them stuck.
Excellent.
Right. I just want to emphasize what you said, Carrie, about sometimes it's someone besides the parent who they might, teenagers, I think, famously think that any idea their parent had was not a great idea. So if they can hear it from somebody with the authority of a prescription pad or a coach who they really respect or something, that might get the message across in a way that they feel is more credible.
Yes.
Yeah, that's helpful. All right. Well, we did get one more question in that minute that I said, so we'll do this one and then we'll wrap up. But, this parent's child is having trouble sleeping. And the question is, how do we improve sleep habits? They specifically mentioned, should they go to bed earlier or should they go to bed later, hoping that they'll be more tired when they go to bed. But I think any general advice you guys have about developing good sleep habits would be beneficial.
My wife just sent me a recent article about strength training and exercise leading to better deep sleep. And that's one thing also, which again, that connection between using your body, using your energy, and then also your rest at night. But in good sleep hygiene, gosh, I have a great book. I have several, Why We Sleep and other things, and other researchers. And part of it, for me, the winding down at night is really meaningful, and what activity you engage in when the work is done, and what's getting your mind really wound up, and what's calming you down. And putting at some point the screen has to be docked somewhere, not in your room, which it should be a rule for all of us, parents and kids. We should model that our phones they're charging in the kitchen or wherever. And reading something helps you wind down versus even watching or engaging or tapping. There shouldn't be a screen at some point. Other things for sleep, apart from the exercise, obviously the caffeine has to stop before 4 o'clock. Some of the basics. I think there is something to be said for the blue light reduction. So the last hour or two, kind of calming that down, watching the blue screens. And diet's part of it too, in terms of healthy balance. So it's all the stuff. It's healthy hydration, but not like super, super late before you go to sleep, and healthy balanced diet, putting the screens away, having time to wind down. Sometimes, like, some people really do benefit from the hot bath, in the evening, because it kind of gets your temperature up and then cools you down, which gets your body ready physiologically for sleep when your temperature drops a couple degrees. So some people, that's really helpful. Nice music, just having a routine is really so incredibly important for sleep, where there's an element of you have these signals and these like triggers, which start telling you, okay, I'm entering, the same as like with your 2-year-old or we have a certain pattern, which I know, Carrie, your kids, the same, like 15 years later, it's the same pattern you've established over a decade ago. Like these certain cues, the body starts receiving these cues. Okay, then this, then this, and then I'm asleep. And so it's it's called sleep hygiene, essentially, having a series of things and patterns. So it's not erratic or free form, but there's a set thing that you do as the wind up and then the wind down, and then you putting your things away. Carrie, what are your thoughts on sleep?
All of the above that you just mentioned. I will say there are sometimes, where even good sleep hygiene, anxiety or fear of insomnia, and insomnia itself does get in the way. So understanding patterns around that. often I will recommend the Breathe app or the Calm app as a way to get out of your head. It's tricky with screens. Sometimes we do need to rely on these apps. But the important thing would be to turn the phone off before you go to bed, and not be looking at the bright light. And, I think, again, what I see is like understanding your natural circadian rhythm. Sometimes short-term melatonin can help before bed if it's a circadian rhythm issue, just like we just had, a change in our time. And if you're traveling, if it's Sunday night is always the night that, adolescents and young adults have trouble sleeping because they're up late Saturday, they sleep in Sunday, they have to go back to their schedule. So it's really kind of getting really curious about what's interfering with sleep.
There's one parent here observing how much you both have mentioned screen time, both in general, especially, and then especially around sleep, and saying like it's a battle in their house and just strategies for limiting screen time. Any parting thoughts on limiting? That's a whole other webinar. And I will say for this parent who's asked this, I'll be happy to follow up with you after the webinar with some articles and webinar recordings we have specifically on that whole topic. But if either of you have any kind of hot takes on limiting screen time before we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation that I think has to start really young. Really like anything else, it's about prioritizing, and we don't seem to have as much of an issue with a battle of bedtime in adolescence or a battle of other things that we need to prioritize, but screen time is highly addictive. The screen, on its own is trying to keep them stuck. And so I really blame the screen. I really would have you watch the Social Dilemma with your kids and really have them understand that these big social media companies are doing this to them, that this is a drug. And by allowing them to be on the screen all the time, you might as well be putting, a huge chunk of cocaine in the middle of your kitchen table and say, go for it. Like, you are doing your job as a parent to limit and then model and then slowly enable them to take control over it. And if we're not doing that, then please reach out, because there are lots and lots of resources to help you start doing it. That's how strongly I feel about this.
It's a good one for all of us to hear.
Absolutely.
Jed, what do you think?
Yeah, I think to your point, early is better, because by the time, I'm seeing kids in late high school, the kids are about to be off on their own, and the parents, they have taken the break. So then it's more of a conversation. You ask them how they feel after they're spending 8 hours on social media, or opportunity costs, because at that point the phone is theirs, but they're going to be watching you to learn all the, when they're 10, they're watching you. When you're driving, when you're interacting at dinner, how are you interacting with your phone? And if you have a problem with your phone and you are overly, then your kids, even if you tell them something else when they're 14, 15, they've been observing you for 10 years. And so we have to keep really good boundaries with our devices from when our kids are like, my daughter is watching me at 2.5, and she's observing the priority, and there's a phone, and she's called me out at 2 years old. And in terms of, if I'm looking at the phone and not looking at her and telling her what's the hierarchy of importance here, in the dinner table, and all of us, but from 2 until 15, when we'll give them a phone at 12 or 13, then unlimited but at a certain point, they've already figured it out. The same as like for driving. My dad began slowing down when I was 14, 15, but you learn how fast to drive when you're about 7 or 8. And you're by observing so you're learning way before they're telling you anything. It's all about the modeling is happening very early. And so for you, doing good modeling, But then when they're 15, 16, having conversations, talking, I mean, they're essentially, it's the phone is maybe theirs, but still you can engage them in a conversation about again, the trade-offs. In lieu of this, are you seeing your friends? Is it supplementing your social life, or is it replacing it? How is it working at night? And all, I think you can have conversations like an adult versus having these control battles, because you don't want to be engaged in this crazy epic control fight with a 16-year-old or because again, they're on the fringe of adulthood. They're about to be on their own. And I've seen hyper control really backfire when kids are finally really free and unencumbered. And you want them to make good choices, and you're helping instruct that versus I'm going to control you, because there's going to be a backlash. There's something in all of us that doesn't want to be controlled, and especially as we get to that age of late adolescence. And so I want to have more discourse, of course, kid safety. But apart from that, the less control, the more respectful engagement, I think, is better. And then also sometimes the natural consequences. And the kids are overusing, the boundaries are bad, but then there are consequences. And kids learning that at 16 versus learning that at 21. Or, there are times when they have to make some mistakes. And as parents, being there, but not, I'm going to control, I'm going to wrest it from your hands when they're 17 years old, which is, now it's going to come out sideways or somewhere else, or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Jed and Carrie, thank you so much. You're both
Ah.
professionals and parents. And so thank you for taking time out of your schedules tonight to help the parents in our audience. As a parent listening here tonight as well, I found it very helpful. So thank you all. Reach out to Applerouth if you have follow-up questions. We're here to help. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
Good night.
Bye, good night.